they're not new ideas, but it will be useful to kind of just draw these out a little bit more explicitly, because I think sometimes we can take for granted what, you know, or you can take for granted what you might be doing within your everyday practices. So it can be useful just to highlight a couple of points before maybe to frame those discussions as you move into them. And the two aspects I just want to reintroduce to you are around differentiation and inclusive pedagogy. And like I said, that first idea in particular isn't going to be new information. This is something that you're doing and will be very familiar with. You'll be doing it within your everyday practices. But I just want to highlight a couple of points in relation to this, like I said, to frame some of those discussions in a moment. And the second point there, you will perhaps, if you've got onto course strand 3 on Pebblepad and some of the reading there, will have been introduced to that. So I'll just highlight a couple of points in relation to that. And again, hopefully that will frame some of the discussions that we'll be having in a moment. So let's just briefly draw out differentiation a little bit more explicitly. And, you know, when we're talking about differentiation, we're talking about kind of tailoring instruction and teaching in a way to meet the diverse needs or interests of all learners in the same classroom. And this concept is rooted in this idea that not all students learn in the same way or at the same pace, and it requires, you know, thoughtful planning, flexibility on part of the educator. To ensure that then we can meet those varied needs. So it's this idea that not one size fits all. And as it says on the slide there, it can provide different pathways or avenues by which all students can learn the same material. And we can differentiate in a number of ways. Okay, we can do that by content, by material, by the product, and also by assessment as well. And Di is going to talk a little bit about assessment later on in this session. But over the next couple of slides, and I'm not going to go through these in detail with you, but there are just some examples, and I'll just flick through so you can see. But there are some examples of how you might differentiate according to the content and according to the methods of delivery. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, and you may be doing excellent things outside of these, but they're just, like I said, some examples to draw this kind of idea out a little bit more explicitly. In terms of content then, just very briefly as a kind of an overarching point in relation to differentiation in this aspect, we often kind of differentiate by complexity and by variety when we're thinking about the content. And one of the key things that you'll be doing within your setting when differentiating in this way is thinking about the readiness of the learner, their interests, their learning profiles, and then adapting and differentiating based on that. So like I said, there are a couple of examples there in relation to that. And then in terms of methods of teaching here, really in terms of differentiation, what you're thinking about is how you can ensure that access and how you can ensure that engagement with material and the content. And you can differentiate in a number of different ways, as you can see on the slide. But what I want to do, particularly given the nature of this module, is to think about differentiation in relation to inclusion. So there's a couple of questions on the board there, or on the slide there, but what I'm hoping to do is actually do a little, use some technology, use some polling technology to help us think about these aspects. So bear with me, I'm just going to stop sharing that and share my other screen. If you have your phone, you can get that ready. Bear with me. There we go. So what I'd like you to do then is, if you get your phone or another kind of, if you're on a laptop, perhaps use a different browser, type in Vivox app and then that ID code. And you should come to our National Saturday 2 poll. So I'll just give you a minute to kind of figure out that bit of technology. So I'm just going to open that now. Great. I can see 17 of you are kind of on that, which is great. So this question should be open and you should be able to type in and just make sure that you click send. And this is just a tester question really to check that the technology is working as it should. And it also gives us a little bit about information about where you've come from today, what settings you're in. Just quite a few primary, it looks like at the moment. There's a few of you still to respond. We're also a range of different settings there. Primary seems to be the most popular, as well as secondary. We've got a number of specialist schools or teachers as well here, which is great. So that's really nice. And we've had a little test of the poll. So most people were able to submit there. But we'll move on to the next question that we've got then, which is, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, to what extent do you feel the curriculum for Wales has provided opportunities to differentiate for learners in your classroom role? So be useful to, interesting to see what people say here. Couple who are perhaps undecided, or but I'll just stop that poll there. And quite a few of you are in kind of the agree, but there's also quite a few of you sit in the middle, which is quite interesting now that we are kind of a few years into the, the different reforms within Wales and the new curriculum. So it'd be interesting to see then your response to this. So I'd like you to provide a reason for the response to the previous question. Why did you respond in the way that you did? And I'll give you a little bit longer to put your responses there. So I think I've set this one up so it doesn't appear at the same time, or it's changed. Oh, there we are. There's some coming in. Brilliant. So you're obviously having a think and writing, which is great. Yeah, that's a really good point for that first one. It allows that flexibility, doesn't it, for your particular group of learners and their interests. Somebody's took the words out of my mouth, flexibility, more pupil voice allowed. So yeah, it does allow you to to be perhaps more inclusive, more flexible in what you put within the class. Ability to create a curriculum suitable. But often, as we see with this, we have kind of, and this has happened in previous years, you have that flexibility and that pupil voice which comes through, but also there are some challenges which has been highlighted. So I'll pick up on some of those in the moment as we go through, as people respond, but too open-ended. So there might need to be more guidance. There's often an issue that has been noted with progression steps over previous years as well, and I think that's been picked up in a couple of places here. I'll just give a couple, I'll give another minute just for some of those responses to go up a little bit. Okay, so I'm just going to stop that there for time. Okay. But yeah, some of the things that have been highlighted are really useful. So it does allow that flexibility as we've kind of drawn out, but also there are still kind of some challenges, and it is interesting to get your experiences and your thoughts on this. So what I'll do as well at the end of this session is take some screenshots and we'll pop that on Pebble Pad so you can kind of have a look through some of these responses as well. But the progression steps is kind of one of the things again that has been picked up frequently over the previous years, and is still continuing to be perhaps a challenge today. So we're now going to think about differentiation very specifically in relation to an inclusive classroom. So I'd like you to again type in your responses to this. So how can differentiation support an inclusive classroom? How does it allow inclusion to take place? So I can see the number going up there. So that's great. Thank you for those responses. We'll give it another minute or so as the other ones come in then. We'll also just give a few more seconds if you want to press send on the bits that you're writing. It can be a sentence, it can be a couple of words. Well, so we'll close that there then, if that's okay. And hopefully we've got a range of responses here. Let's see when they come up, and we'll work our way through. So it can encourage independence, allows opportunities for all. So yeah, that equality, it can increase that engagement. Lovely opportunities for all to engage, sense of belonging. Yet they're still within the classroom environment, aren't they? Accessing the same things, but perhaps in slightly different ways, enables that engagement. They can access assignments in different ways. Yep, so it's tailored to their learning. It allows them to access learning brilliance. So some similar things coming out here. Supports ALM without isolating. Again, that links in with that idea of a sense of belonging, doesn't it? Addresses diverse needs. So allows us to have a range of children within that classroom with different needs. Excellent. Allows learners to access a curriculum and make progress. Yes. Strategies to meet different learning styles. All pupils can be involved at the same time. So some really similar themes coming through there about kind of equity, about engagement, about belonging, and about kind of addressing different needs through different ways, which is lovely to see. So thank you for that. Now I want us to think about this question. How could differentiation become a barrier to inclusion? How could differentiation become a barrier to inclusion? So again, if you could just write a short sentence when you're ready, and we'll see what some of those responses are. So just give another minute as those responses go up a little bit more. And then we'll run through some of the aspects that you've noted. Well, it's slowed a little bit, so I'll take the opportunity. Oh, there we go. We've got one more in. I'll close the poll. Oh, 20 out of 20. Brilliant. Well done. I'll just close that poll then and we'll see what some of those responses are. So there might be practical challenges related to it, certainly. Yeah, so that might be perhaps more of a challenge, perhaps in terms of how we, ensure that we are able to differentiate. Pupils may feel less able than their peers. Yeah, if they're perhaps continually aware that they might be doing, lower level of work, they might feel different. It might stigmatize them, perhaps. Yep, certainly. Sometimes it becomes segregation instead of inclusion. Yeah, excellent. And that's a really good point, I think. highlights those who need differentiation. So again, that stigma, that othering perhaps might be there. This is an interesting one as well, might not be able to show true potential. So again, perhaps I think sometimes, and this is talked about in literature as well, it might lead to this watered down curriculum, so to speak, or a lack of challenge in terms of the content that you might deliver to certain pupils. So perhaps, yes, that might lead to not able to show true potential. Learners become aware of their differentiated work. Yeah, risk of oversimplifying information. So again, you can see these themes that keep emerging from some of your responses here. Social divide, lower expectations, singling out, students not wanting to be seen as different. Not differentiated wide enough, to tick box. Okay, so these are really some really interesting responses here, and hopefully they kind of got you to think about how differentiation might be a really useful starting point to kind of meet the needs of learners. But actually there are some things that we need to bear in mind in relation to that. And perhaps it can be more of a starting point, if you like. So I'm just going to stop sharing that screen. Apologies for the to and throw in, and just share the slides again, because that leads us on to the next point that I do just want to kind of introduce with you. So do bear with me as I get to the right slide now. And that's inclusive pedagogy. So an inclusive pedagogy is perhaps the next step, if you like, and it's an approach to teaching that aims to kind of overcome differences between learners by extending the options that are available to everybody rather than differentiating activities only for some learners. Okay, and it's this idea of kind of moving away from, you know, the aspects that we just highlighted as challenges, really, in relation to inclusion on that previous activity. There is an emphasis within this on high quality for all. So by differentiation activities for some learners, that might, you know, lead to that watered down curriculum that you highlighted. But this inclusive pedagogy aims to kind of overcome that and seem to be a bit more proactive rather than reactive, if you like. And the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education highlights this kind of idea that it's a move away from this additional or separate approaches that can highlight differences and that can lead to comparison, ranking, labelling, and belief about fixed abilities. So it moves away from that. And the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education also go on to say and highlight that it is important for all teachers to be aware of inclusive pedagogy, and particularly leaders as well, in order to ensure a more inclusive classroom. And the next couple of slides just highlight a framework of inclusive pedagogy. And this was in one of the readings that is on PebblePad. And I've also included it as the handout for this bit of the session. So you can look through this in your own time. And I've got mine here actually. But hopefully you can see that it might be a useful tool to look at to reflect on what might be happening within your own classroom. And it's got useful principles, useful actions to think about, some of the key challenges in relation to inclusive pedagogy, some of which you've noted already when we were talking about the challenges of differentiation, and also what to look for in practice. So that might be something useful that might come up in the discussions that we're going to have in a moment, or it might be something that you'd like to reflect upon within your own practice after the sessions today. So hopefully what we've just introduced or reintroduced, differentiation and inclusive pedagogy, are useful thinking points to frame the discussion that you are now going to have. So what I'd like you to do is think about some of the barriers and challenges in relation to these areas within your classroom or setting. And then again, think about, if you can, how you might overcome those. So even if it's just the last minute that you kind of list some strategies, that would be really helpful. So again, there's a code for you to scan to go to that Padlet and record that, or I think we'll be able to pop it in the chat. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this. So we'll come back just after 11 o'clock and we'll have a brief bit of feedback before I hand over to Di for the final bit of this session. So what are the barriers in relation to inclusion for these different areas, and how could they be overcome? If we could go into breakout rooms, Christina, that would be great.
No problem, just opening them now.
Fab, thank you.